So good evening, everyone. We're so excited to have Sara deBeer with us tonight. She's a local storyteller, and she's here to share some tales of women, wise and wondrous. So Sara, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's wonderful. It's Women's History Month and lovely to have a chance to kind of steep a little bit in different women and their way that they rise to different challenges and overcome them. I wasn't sure what age listeners there would be. It seems like the group that we've gathered are primarily adults, but I thought, who knows who will listen to it on the library listening. So I wanted to begin with a story about a young girl. I thought tonight would be kind of a night when we would kind of explore the ages of women. So we'll start with a young girl. This is a story that many storytellers love to tell. It's called The Gunny Wolf, and it has parallels on the African continent, and this is a Gullah version. There was once a girl who lived with her mother in a small house close to the forest. And there was a fence all around their house with a gate because, as the mother would say over and over again to the little girl, you need to stay inside the fence. That's where you are safe. Don't ever go by yourself out the gate and never go into the forest because that is where the gunny wolf lives. And because the mother was very concerned about whether her daughter would listen to her, because daughters don't always listen to mothers, when she would go down the long road and walk until they finally came to the village where they could do some shopping, she would make that little girl go all the way to the village and all the way back. And that little girl would moan and groan and ask, couldn't she please stay home by herself? Until one day the mother decided that the little girl was old enough and she could stay home by herself. And she looked at her daughter and she said, but you remember what the rule is. The little girl said, yes, I will stay inside the fence. I will not go out the gate because it's dangerous. And if I went into the forest, I might meet up with the gunny wolf. The mother said, remember that. And off she went. And the little girl thought, oh, my mother's so wonderful. She trusts me so much. I want to let her know how much I love her. I know. I will make a bouquet of flowers and I'll put it in a vase. And when she comes home, she can see how much I love her. And so she began picking flowers inside their yard. But then she spotted a beautiful flower. Oh, it was so beautiful. It was more than one color and it had little frilly things. And it was, oh, just outside by the gate. And she tried to squeeze her arm through the fence to get it, and she couldn't reach it that way. And she thought, I know what I'll do. I'll open the gate. I'll just run out, pick that flower, and come right back in again and close the gate. Well, she opened the gate and she ran out and she picked the flower. And at that moment, she saw, ooh, another beautiful flower. Oh, it was so beautiful. She just thought, I'll just get that one too. And she began picking flower after flower. And as she picked, she sort of began humming to herself the way that children do. And eventually she was humming a little song. Kum kwa kilo, kum kwa kilo, kum kwa kilo. And she was picking flower after flower, and she was paying absolutely no attention to where her path was going, and into the forest she went. And there were some beautiful flowers there, and she just kept picking them. Kum qua kilo, kum qua kilo, kum qua kilo. Right there in front of her, she saw these hairy legs and hairy feet, and she looked up. And there was no doubt this was the gunny wolf. And the gunny wolf spoke to her. And he said, "Little girl, sing that good and sweet song again." She didn't know what song she had been singing. She thought it must have been something while I was picking flowers, and so she began to pretend she was picking flowers and see if the song would come back to her. Um, what? Oh, qua kilo, qua kilo. And then she heard a very welcome sound. She heard the gunny wolf had fallen asleep, and she began to run away from the gunny wolf back toward her house. Pit-a-pat, 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 pit-a-pat. But because that little girl was not singing, the gunny wolf woke up, and he began chasing after her. Kunga-chua, kunga-chua, kunga-chua. And he got right up because he was faster than she was. And he said, "Little girl, why you move?" She said, I didn't move. "Little girl, sing that good and sweeten song again." And this time she remembered it. Plus, she knew what might happen. And so she began to sing. Qua kilo, qua kilo, qua kilo. And those of you who like to make snoring noises without unmuting yourself, you could make some snoring noises yourself. And the little girl began to run, pit-a-pat, 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 pit-a-pat. She was running and running as fast as she could. She could see her house. She could see the gate. The gunny wolf woke up, and he began to run after her. Kunga-chua, kunga-chua, kunga. She ran out from the forest toward her gate, and the gunny wolf stopped at the edge of the forest, because he knew it was not safe for him if he went out into that open space. And the little girl ran pit-a-pat, pit-a-pat, pit-a-pat up to the gate, and she opened the gate and she went back inside, and I'm not sure what she did. I don't even know if she told her mother what had happened or not. What I do know is that the gunny wolf turned and, oh, he was very sad. And he began walking back into that forest, and he was thinking about how he would never hear that song again. And then he saw all the flowers that the little girl had dropped. And he began picking them up one at a time. And as he did, he began to sing. Qua kilo, qua kilo, qua kilo. and the gunny wolf sang happily ever after. So that is a story that I really wanted to begin with because it's a story with a young girl having a bit of an adventure. And this next story is a story that comes from Norway. And I wanted to share it with you as we move through the ages of women. There was once a farmer's daughter, and she was a hard-working girl. And the farmer, he didn't even have enough farm to keep that girl busy. And so he began to have her go and work for the squire. And she was working hard one day on the squire's land. And the squire, well, his wife had died a while ago, and he felt rather lonely. And he looked out at that young girl, and he thought, well, she would make a wife for me, and I am so rich. She'll immediately say yes if I ask her to marry me. And so as soon as the thought came into his head, he decided to act on it because that's the way he was. And he went out to the field and he realized he had on his nice boots. He should have changed perhaps, but he was on his way. So he continued and he went through the kind of muddy ground until he went up to that girl and he said, "Good morning." "Good morning," she said, and continued working away. He said, I've been thinking about getting married again." "Oh," she said, "that's nice." He thought, well, she's a little slow, I guess. Yeah, I thought that you would be my wife." And she said, "Oh, that's not at all likely." And she went back to work. And he didn't know what to say next. And so he turned around and he thought about it and he realized he'd better go and talk to her father, which he did. He cleaned off his boots and he got in a wagon and off he went and he arrived at the farmer's house. The farmer himself was not as hard a worker as his daughter was. And he was sitting on his front porch and he saw the squire arrive and he said, "Good morning." "Good morning," said the squire. "I've decided that your daughter shall be my wife." "Oh," said the farmer, "that's nice." "Well, she doesn't think it's nice. In fact, she says she won't have me." "Oh," said the farmer, "well, then you'd better look elsewhere. She's a pretty strong-minded girl." The squire said, "I don't want to look elsewhere. And here's what I have to tell you. You had better persuade your daughter to marry me, or I'm going to ask for that land that you've been paying me money to buy. I'm going to ask for the payment right away, and you'll lose your farm." "Oh," said the farmer, "well, just leave her to me. I'll take care of it." And so the squire went back home very satisfied. The farmer's daughter came home. The farmer got up out of his rocking chair and he put his arms around his daughter and he said, "Oh, daughter, I am so happy for you. The squire will make you a wonderful husband." "Squire," she said, "I wouldn't marry that squire if he were buried up to his ears in gold, because I think that's what you're talking about here." And the farmer, he tried coaxing her and scolding her. He tried sweet words and angry words, and nothing made a bit of difference. So then he got himself over to the squire's house and he said, "Here's what we have to do. She's being a little stubborn, but just go ahead and plan the wedding. Get everything all organized, get the food, get the guests, and when it's all ready, send a messenger. We'll whisk her up there. She'll get married to you, and once she's married, she won't put up such a fuss. Well, that sounded great to the squire, and he enjoyed all the plans he made, picked the day and all the food that was going to be served, and sent out the invitations. And when the day and the guests had finally arrived, he went to the boy who works for him, and he said, "Go and get that tell the farmer to send what he has promised me, and mind your back in a flash or I'll." And the boy was off like a shot. And he got to the farmer's house, and he was, I was told to come and get what you promised my master, and I've got to get it fast because he's in a terrible temper this morning. And the farmer said, "Oh, she's down by the stream. Just go and just kind of persuade her to go for a walk with you. That's all you need to do." And so the boy ran down to the stream, and there was the farmer's daughter. And he said, "I'm here to get what your father promised my master, and I have to do it fast. It's supposed to be down here by the stream." And the farmer's daughter said, "Oh," to herself, "that's what they're up to." And so she turned to that boy and she said, "Oh, your master wanted that little bay mare. See, she wandered a bit, but she's right there. Just get up on her back and ride her home." Well, that seemed easy enough. So he rode the little bay mare back and tied her up and went to tell the squire. "Well, she's here. I tied her up to that pole there." And the squire said, "Oh, so she is being stubborn, a feisty woman. I like a feisty woman. Okay, don't leave her there. Bring her upstairs and have all the girls from the kitchen come up and dress her in all the wedding finery. And mind they don't forget the wreath or the veil." The boy said, "What?" "You heard me. Bring her up to my mother's old room, have her dressed in all the wedding finery, get those girls to go upstairs, and if she's having a little bit of trouble, just get some strong men to help you out." And so they went, and the boy said to the girls in the kitchen, "I guess the master wants to play a trick on the guests. You're supposed to go up and decorate the little bay mare as if she's the bride." And well, the girls, they had such a time. It was a little tricky, but it was a lot of fun. And then the boy went back to the squire and said, "Well, sir, that's done." And the squire said, "Well, don't leave her up there. Bring her down the stairs, and I'll be waiting at the foot of the stairs to meet her." And the boy said, what if she won't go? Those men who've been helping you, get them to bring her on down." And so it was done. Down came that bride, and I assure you there was quite a clumping, because that bride did not have silken slippers on. And whose nose did the squire's kiss land on but the nose of that little bay mare, all dressed up in wedding finery? And everybody in the room laughed and laughed. That was the last the squire had to do with that bride. And they say he never went courting again. So I want to move to Spain for this next story of a young woman a bit older than the farmer's daughter. And this story is one that begins in a kind of playful way, and then it takes quite a turn. So I hope you'll enjoy it. There were once 3 brothers and a sister, and they lived in a small cottage. And they lived very comfortably, despite the fact that none of them did a whole lot of work. They just got by, but they enjoyed being with each other. They enjoyed their little cottage. Until one day, the older brother said to his 2 younger brothers and his sister, "You know, we live quite comfortably and we hardly work at all. Imagine what would happen if we 4 went out and worked with all our strength and all our power. We could probably become wealthy. We could probably build ourselves a palace." And they thought that was a wonderful idea. And all 4 of them went and worked and became so wealthy that they were able to build themselves a palace where the little cottage had stood. Well, if you've ever been in a neighborhood where suddenly an enormous building appears, where there had only been a small one before, you know that people are curious about it. And people began to walk past this palace and try and peek in the windows. The thing was that the brothers and the sister were very proud of their palace and all their wonderful furniture and rugs and chandeliers. And so they began inviting people to come on tours, and they would take them on a tour through all the palace, and everybody oohed and ahed until one day, at the end of the tour, an old woman said to them, "You know, your palace is magnificent, but I've never seen a palace that didn't have a small chapel where people could say prayers." And after she left, they thought, "Oh, we'd better go back to work." And they did. And they worked so successfully, and they earned so much money that they were able to build a cathedral next to their palace. And now the tours were longer and many more oohs and ahs, until one day at the end of a tour, an old man said to them, "Both your palace and your cathedral are extraordinary, but the gardens behind your palace are really quite ordinary. Would you not like to have in the gardens behind your palace the tree of beauty, watered by the water of life with the talking bird in its branches?" And they said, "Yes, yes, where would we find them?" And the old man said, "Do you see that faraway mountain? If you travel and go to the top of that faraway mountain, you will find all those treasures." And the older brother, the oldest one of all, said, "I will go tomorrow morning." But the sister said, "Wait. We have never been separated in all our lives. If my oldest brother goes on this journey, how will I know if he's safe?" And the old man reached inside of his cloak, and he pulled out a knife, and he held it in front of the sister. "You see how this blade shines. If there were ever harm that came to your brother, this shining blade would be covered with blood." Well, she reached out and she took that blade, and she thanked the man, and she brought it to a box that she had that she used to keep jewelry in, and she put the knife in that box. And early the next morning, the oldest brother set out on his journey. He traveled and traveled and traveled until he came to the foot of the mountain. And there he met a giant. And the giant said, "Who are you, traveler?" And the brother said, "I am here in search of the water of life and the tree of beauty and the talking bird. Is this the correct place?" And the giant said, "Many like you have come this way, have tried to reach the top of the mountain, but not one has ever returned. And you will not return either unless you do as I tell you. The path you must walk on to go to the top of the mountain is covered with stones. As you walk on those stones, they will call out to you. Do not allow those voices to make you turn around. Walk and walk, eyes straight ahead until you reach the top." And the brother thanked the giant, and he went on his way, and he began to travel up that path of stones. And as he first stepped onto the path, he heard some taunts, some insults. And he didn't really find that they bothered him so much, but he then climbed a little higher and a little higher, and the voices got crueler and more mocking, and the anger began to build and build inside of him. And then he heard such a mocking, cruel taunt that he turned to throw a stone at that voice, and he himself became another stone on that path. Well, back at the palace, it seemed to the sister it was taking far too long for her brother to come back to their palace. And so she went and she opened that box, and she saw the blade was covered in blood. And she showed it to her brothers. And the second brother said, "Do not be afraid, my sister. I will go tomorrow morning, and I will go in search of our brother and of the treasures, the pool of the water of life, the talking bird, and the tree of beauty. I will bring all back to our palace." And as he set out on that journey, the sister looked again, and the blade was once again shining steel. Well, that second brother traveled and traveled and traveled, and he met that giant. And the giant told him, just as he had told the oldest brother, there will be voices that call out to you from the stone path. Do not let them cause you to turn back. Climb until you reach the top. And the second brother began to climb that path of stones, and he heard those voices, and he tried to ignore them, and the voices got crueler and more mocking, taunting him. And then he heard, crueler than any other voice, he heard the voice of his own brother, and he turned, and he became another stone on that path. Well, back at the palace, 2-3 times a day, the girl was checking that box, and the day came when she saw the blade was again covered in blood. And she showed her youngest brother, and he said, "Do not be afraid, my sister. I will do what you need us to do. I will save our brothers, and I will get the water of life and the tree of beauty and the talking bird." And indeed, as he set out on his journey, the blade returned to shining steel. He traveled and traveled and traveled, and he also met that giant. He also was told how he must climb that path of stones and not turn back no matter what the voices said to him. And then he began the climb. And as he climbed, the taunts, the cruel words, and he thought, I'm not going to let them bother me. I'm going to keep climbing. And then, louder and crueler than any other voices, he heard the voices of his own two brothers, and he turned and became another stone on that path. Back at the palace, the sister could not bear to even leave that blade in the box. She carried it with her wherever she went, whatever she did. And the day came that she both feared would come and yet knew would come. Once more, she saw that blade covered in blood. Now it is my turn, she said. And she put down the knife, and she got a brass cage for the talking bird, and she got a brass pitcher for the water of life. And she started out on her journey. She traveled and traveled and traveled, and she met that giant. Please, have you seen 3 young men, one after the other, come in search of the water of life, the talking bird, the tree of beauty? They're my brothers. I don't know what has happened to them. Have you seen them? And the giant said, I have seen them. I have seen many, many people come in search of treasures that are found at the top of this mountain, but no one has ever returned. And you will not return either unless you can do exactly what I tell you. When you begin climbing up that path of stones, they will shout out at you. Do not allow them to cause you to turn back, to turn around. Continue climbing until you reach the top. Well, she picked up the pitcher and the cage, and she began to climb up that path of stones. But as she took her first steps on that path, what she heard were cries of anguish, voices filled with tremendous pain. And the higher she climbed, the more pain-filled were those cries. And then came the moment when she heard anguish crying out in the voices of her 3 brothers. And she wanted to turn, and she wanted to search for them, and she wanted to save them. But she remembered the words of the giant, and she kept her eyes fixed on the top of that mountain, and she climbed and she climbed and she climbed until finally she stepped off that path of stone. And there she saw that the tree of beauty, and in its branches the talking bird, and by its side, the pool of the water of life. And she went and she filled her pitcher with the water of life. And she broke off a branch from the tree of beauty and placed it in the cage. And the talking bird followed and went right into the cage and sat on the branch from the tree of beauty. And she picked up the cage and she picked up the pitcher. And now she had the treasures. But she did not have any idea how to save her three brothers. And at last, because she could not think of anything else, she turned and prepared to go back down that path of stones. And she was so tired. And the pitcher was so heavy that her hand began to tremble. And a drop of water from the pitcher fell and landed on one of the stones. And up sprang a young woman. And she began to sprinkle the water, and stone after stone transformed to young man, young woman. And she knew now what to do. And she kept refilling the pitcher and sprinkling water onto that path of stones until there was not one stone left on that path. And she was surrounded by a great crowd of young men and young women. And there were her own three brothers. And she led this great crowd of people like a parade down the mountain and back to their palace and behind the palace. And she took the branch from the tree of beauty and she watered it with the water of life, and it immediately grew into a full tree, and the talking birds settled in its branches. And you can imagine that even more people came to see these sights. And the son of the king himself came. And he marveled at the palace and the cathedral and the garden with the tree of beauty and the talking bird. And he thought they were all remarkable. But he felt like nothing was more remarkable than this young woman who had saved her three brothers. And so he asked her to marry him, and she agreed. And they were wed in that cathedral. And they lived happily to the end of their days. Well, we've kind of been moving on through the ages of women, and I wanted to end with a story that comes from England, where I'll just tell it to you. There was once an old woman who lived outside of a village, but she would go into that village and play cards with her friends and drink and tell jokes, and not all of them are jokes that I would be comfortable telling to you. She had a wonderful time. She had a wonderful circle of friends. And she was loud, and she was crude, and she was a complete embarrassment to her daughter, and even more so to her son-in-law. And the more that people talked about this woman, the more upset the son-in-law became. And he said to his wife over and over, "Your mother doesn't know the proper way to behave now that she's gotten to be an older person. Most people sit in their homes by the fire, they knit, they rock. She goes out until all hours. She's playing cards. She's gambling. She's drinking. You've got to do something about her. And so the daughter said, all right, I don't know that there's a whole lot I can do. She's always been this way. She's still this way. I don't really know that I can make any change in the kind of person she is, but if it means something to you, I will try and go and talk to her. And so she went to her mother and she said, Mother, I know that you like being with your friends. I understand that. And this is something you've been doing all your life. But you're older now, and it's time to kind of have a quieter life. You'll enjoy a quieter life. And she talked with her mother and talked with her mother, and her mother listened, and she'd found there was no point in talking back to her daughter. She just knew who she was, and she wasn't going to change it. But when the daughter left, the mother thought to herself, you know what I think is going on here? I think she's lonely, married to that stick of a man. I feel sorry for her. She wishes that her life were a little more lively. So she thought about that, but it didn't change the way she lived her life. And the son-in-law said, well, you really got to do something about your mother. And the daughter said, well, maybe we should suggest that she move in with us. No, I don't think that's a good idea. But if she moved in with us, then she wouldn't be out in that house all by herself. And she's going out to be with her friends, but she would sit and visit with us instead. And eventually the son-in-law agreed that it would be better if they could kind of put a little bit of a fence around his mother-in-law, and maybe they could keep her at home more than she was able to stay home by herself. So the daughter went and she talked with her mother. And it was one of those conversations where each person has a completely different understanding of the conversation. So the daughter thought she was being very effective, persuading her mother that her mother was lonely and that it would be really nice for the mother to move in with her daughter and her son-in-law, and it would be much more pleasant that way. And the mother thought the daughter was saying how lonely she was married to that stick of a man and how she wished that her mother would come and liven her life up a little bit. So the mother thought a little bit about how much she liked living by herself, but she was a good mother and she wanted to take good care of her daughter. And so she agreed to move in with them. And once she moved in, she began doing the very difficult job of trying to liven things up in their house. And she would sing songs and she would tell stories, all kinds of stories. She loved telling about the different ghost-like creatures that were supposed to live in the woods around them. No gunny wolf, but there were these two called the buck-a-gwydden and the buck-a-doo. The buck-a-gwydden had to do with the idea of good or white, and that he was just a kind of little creature that liked to play some tricks. But the buck-a-doo was this dark, almost evil creature, and he would haunt the woods, and he loved chasing after the buck-a-gwydden. So it was a hard life for the buck-a-gwydden because whenever the buck-a-doo arrived, he would be chased around in the forest. So she's telling these stories and telling these stories, and the husband is just beside himself. Why did he let this woman into his house? And she is very aware that she's not getting the kind of response that she's used to. And so the mother decides, why hang out with these two boring people when I could be with my friends? And so she went back to hanging out in the pubs and playing the cards and drinking and telling the jokes. And the son-in-law said, now it's worse because she lives with us and people are blaming us for her behavior. And the daughter said, you know those stories she was telling about the buck a gwydden and the buck a do? She stays out so late. She goes up by that fence where the steps go up and then down again, that sty. And what we should do is have you dress up as if you're the buckadoo. And don't rise up when she's walking on the steps, but once she comes firmly down to the ground, just rise up and just scare her, make scary noises. And she'll be so terrified that she won't keep going out at night. And the husband said, why do I have to do that? She said, because you're taller than I am and your voice is deeper. Just do it. And I promise you, she'll stay home after that. So he agreed. And the night of his performance came. And so, of course, the mother was off doing her gambling and card playing and everything else. And the daughter said, okay, I'm putting this sheet over you. I'm going to walk you to the spot, and you just have to listen for her. And once you're sure she's safely to the ground, just rise up and make scary noises. This was not in his comfort zone. But she put the sheet over him. And he said, what? There's no eye holes here. She said, you don't think I'm going to cut holes in my good sheet? I'm going to lead you there. And so she led her husband and she settled him in his spot. She had him do a little rehearsal of rising up and making scary noises. He was not the person she would have cast in that role, but she didn't have any choice. She went back home and he waited and waited. And he wasn't used to being out at night, and he had this sheet over him, and he was hearing these strange kind of noises. Didn't feel very safe where he was. But then he heard his mother-in-law, her old cracked voice. On this dark night, there's not to see but Bucka Gwitten, Buckadoo, and me. On this dark night, there's not to see but Bucka Gwitten, Buckadoo, and me. And he hears her coming up and coming down, and he can see from the bottom of the sheet that her feet are firmly on the ground, and he rises up and goes, ooh. And the mother goes, saw the buckadoo, he's gonna start chasing you any minute now. You better run, you better run. And he suddenly heard what sounded like steps. And he suddenly became terrified that the buckadoo was going to be chasing him. And he started to run. And his mother-in-law started going, run, Bucka Gwyn, run. The buckadoo is after you. Oh, buckadoo, faster. I think you can catch him tonight. And off he went. Well, the daughter was waiting at home. And finally, her husband got home. And he was very shaken. He didn't even have his usual cup of tea. He took a little something a little stronger. And just then his mother-in-law came in. And she said, "Oh, such doings. Buckagwidden and Buckadoo were both out running around. Buckadoo was chasing little Buckagwidden. Now, I didn't get a good look at Buckadoo, but I can tell you, very interesting, Buckagwidden was wearing a sheet, very much like your sheet's daughter. And he had boots very much like yours, my son-in-law." And she started to laugh. And the daughter started to laugh. And the husband tried to join in a little bit. And the next night, the mother said to her daughter, "There's a wonderful sing-song happening. Do you want to come with me?" And I can't tell you if the daughter said yes or no. But I know that that mother was there with her friends, and she went on enjoying life to its fullest for many long years. So I'm so glad to have had a chance to share these stories with you tonight. And if we flip me back into gallery mode, maybe people, if they wanted to stay and ask a question or two, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was wonderful.